My name is Bernice. I'm 55 years old and live in a small town in the state of Vermont. I used to be a high school literature teacher, a job I held for over 20 years before retiring early to take care of my family. My husband, Galvin, is 4 years older than me. He runs an organic food distribution company founded by his family in the 1980s. We live in a wooden house by the lake, a house I bought after my parents passed away and left me just enough inheritance. At that time, Galvin was still restructuring the company after his cousin withdrew his investment, so I put the house entirely under my name to simplify the legal process. We didn't talk much about ownership. I thought, as husband and wife, the house belonged to both of us. The house isn't big, but it's cozy. Pine-paneled walls, a balcony that overlooks the lake behind, where I usually make tea in the morning. Galvin likes to display the antiques he collects in the living room, while I spend time tending to the small garden with lavender and cherry tomatoes out front. Every morning, we had a routine, breakfast together before he went to the office. I wasn't involved in running the business, but I occasionally helped Galvin draft customer letters, polish presentations, or brainstorm ideas for marketing campaigns. Those tasks weren't formal, and I never asked for any recognition. I simply thought, I'm helping my husband, just as he once helped me when I first started teaching, until Marcia, Galvin's younger sister, moved in. Marcia is Galvin's youngest sister. She used to live in Atlanta, working as a manager for a chain of beauty salons, but the job was unstable. After her second divorce, Marcia lost her house, her job, and had almost no one left to rely on. When she called Galvin to ask if she could come to Vermont for a while, to rest and sort her life out, he immediately agreed. I didn't object. Even though I wasn't close to Marcia, I understood she was going through a hard time. We cleaned up the upstairs bedroom, formerly my old study, so Marcia could have her own space. At first, I tried to create a friendly atmosphere. I invited Marcia to the weekend market, suggested she try planting some herbs in the garden. But Marcia wasn't interested. She spent most of her time at home, talking on the phone or watching YouTube. She often woke up late, ate breakfast close to noon, and had a habit of inserting herself into things I didn't think concerned her. Within just a few weeks, I noticed Marcia had a habit of commenting on everything from how I cooked to what flowers I put on the dining table. She once said bluntly, "Bernice, you're tidy, but your house is kind of dull. Maybe because you've lived like a teacher for too long." I didn't react, but Galvin laughed and played along, as if it were just a harmless joke. Marcia started to show interest in Galvin's business. She asked him about expansion plans and offered media consulting, even though she had no experience in that field. I stayed reserved and didn't interfere. I believed Galvin was smart enough to know what ideas were worth considering. One evening, while washing the dishes, I happened to overhear their conversation. Marcia said, "You need to think bigger. She's a good person, but she doesn't share your vision. She keeps you stuck in a comfort zone you should have left long ago." I paused, standing still for a few seconds. Not because her words made me angry, but because I started to realize that Marcia's presence was no longer temporary. She was exerting influence, and Galvin either didn't see it or didn't want to. 3 months after Marcia moved in, something happened that made me sit down with myself and begin documenting every detail. That afternoon, I was checking the mailbox when I found a white envelope bearing the logo of a notary office in Burlington, the one Galvin usually used for company paperwork. I assumed it was some document he needed me to sign, so I brought it into the house and opened it. Inside was a copy of a property certificate, the lakeside house I had been the sole owner of for over 15 years, now listed as jointly owned by me and Marcia Landry. I read it 3 times, double-checked the file number. Everything was valid. There was an electronic signature, but it wasn't mine. The registration date was 2 weeks ago. I had never been informed. That evening, after dinner, I placed the document on the table and asked Galvin, "When did you transfer half of this house to Marcia?" He glanced at the paper, set down his chopsticks, and answered as if explaining something completely normal. "She needed collateral to get a loan for her new salon. I figured it wouldn't affect you, since this house is marital property. I handled it for convenience." I didn't want to argue, but I knew very well That house was purchased with my inheritance, a separate asset with clear documentation prior to our marriage, not subject to mandatory division under Vermont law. I had never signed any document related to its transfer. 2 days later, I contacted Mr. Henderson, the lawyer who once helped my father. He had retired, but he referred me to another attorney, Mrs. Margot Fraser, who specialized in cases involving property and power of attorney fraud in marriages. That evening, I began reopening every email, every draft, every piece of content I had helped Galvin write over the years. I had never asked for credit or compensation for those contributions, but now I needed to document everything, step by step. I started with what I knew best, the document files on my old hard drive, where I had saved almost all the drafts of marketing content, brand improvement proposals, and translated speeches Galvin had used at various business conferences. I hadn't kept them with the intent to accuse anyone. I kept them because I'm used to doing things in an orderly fashion, and because for years, I was the only one editing his speeches whenever he had an event. Customer feedback emails, little notes saying, "Bernice, can you help revise this part?" now became a form of indirect evidence. I wasn't just a wife, I had contributed to shaping the company's brand identity. After compiling a list of all the materials I had worked on, I sent everything to Attorney Margot for legal evaluation. She responded quickly. "If you have additional drafts, handwritten edits, or confirmed email exchanges, this could definitely be considered unrecognized intellectual contribution." I continued checking the bank statements. In one of Galvin's transaction records, I discovered a nearly $18,000 transfer from the company's operating fund to an account under the name Marcia Landry, labeled Advance for New Business Branch Development. The company had no shareholder meeting minutes related to that decision. I asked Margot to verify the asset records. She found that Marcia had used her share of the lakeside house as collateral for a personal loan from a high-interest finance company. That meant, if she defaulted, part of the house could be repossessed, even though I had never agreed to lend or mortgage it. That prompted me to file a motion with the court to temporarily suspend any property transactions involving the house, citing suspected forgery and the risk of irreparable harm if the contract remained in effect. At the same time, I submitted a formal request for an internal audit of the company, under the capacity of a spouse with financial ties to the business, since I had signed a few consulting contracts during the early restructuring phase. Margot advised me to proceed quietly, not to inform Galvin until the court issued an official order. Everything happened quietly. I still cooked, still went out to the garden in the morning, still greeted Marcia when she passed by the kitchen. But in my mind, every step had been mapped out. The house, the company, the evidence, and the right to protect legal property. When the court summoned Galvin for a preliminary hearing and issued a notice freezing the property transfer rights, he had no idea I had been preparing for nearly 3 weeks. The hearing was held on Wednesday morning at the county courthouse. I arrived about 20 minutes early. My lawyer, Mrs. Margot, was already waiting in the hallway, holding a thick file folder. Galvin's representative was a middle-aged man in a gray suit with a rather confident expression. Marcia was not present. She was excused from attending, as she was considered a third party not directly disputing. The session started on time. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, with neatly tied silver hair and a clear, impartial voice. My lawyer began with the property documentation, proving that the lakeside house was purchased using my personal inheritance before marriage, solely under my name, with no signed deed of gift or transfer. Then came the bank statements and a copy of the loan agreement Marcia had signed with a finance company, using her share of the house as collateral. The judge interrupted Galvin's lawyer as soon as he tried to argue that Galvin believed he had signing authority. She said, "In all transactions involving real estate titled to an individual, assuming consent without legal confirmation has no legal standing." Next, Mrs. Margot presented the second portion, documents proving my intellectual contributions to the company's operations and brand development. She provided drafts, confirmation emails, and even short audio files I had recorded while reading Galvin's speeches for him to practice. Galvin's lawyer initially dismissed it, claiming these were merely family support tasks. But the judge asked directly, Do you have any evidence that your client ever compensated or formally acknowledged these contributions in writing? There was no answer. After over an hour of proceedings, the court issued several temporary rulings. The house transfer to Marcia was immediately nullified. A freeze order on the property's usage and mortgage rights would remain in effect until the formal trial. Galvin was ordered to personally repay the funds transferred from the company account to Marcia or present a valid shareholder resolution within 30 days. I was granted the right to file for corporate share redistribution, provided I could prove the lasting value and financial impact of my contributions. When the session ended, I stood, gave a slight bow to the judge, and walked out first. Galvin followed behind, saying nothing. We didn't ride home together. I drove straight home, made a pot of black tea, and opened my notebook to record the entire process I had just been through. Outside, a light rain was falling. After the hearing, Galvin sent me a message. Short, not many words. I didn't expect things to go this far. If you want to talk, I'm here. I read that message in the evening. I didn't reply right away. 3 days later, I agreed to meet at a small cafe near my old office. We sat at the table by the window, the one that used to be our favorite. Galvin wore a gray sweater, looking tired. He didn't say anything for the first few minutes. I didn't rush him. Finally, he asked, "When did you start doing all of this?" I answered briefly, "The day you signed the house over to someone else without asking me." He stayed silent, then lowered his head. "I was wrong. I thought you would notice, or would understand Marcia's situation." After that meeting, I didn't return to the lakeside house right away. I spent 2 weeks at a rented cabin on the edge of town, a place with a small fireplace, a window looking out to the maple woods, and no one knowing where I was. I needed space to rearrange everything. I also spent time talking to my lawyer and an old friend, now a business consultant. Together, we drafted a proposal to buy into the company through a small women-led investment fund under my name and 2 partners. 3 months after the hearing, I officially became a strategic shareholder of the company. No longer Galvin's wife, no longer the unpaid helper. I didn't hold an executive title, but I had a say in creative direction and brand decisions. Marcia left Vermont after her loan was called in, and her rental apartment was seized for overdue debt. I never heard from her again. As for Galvin, we separated peacefully. No court, no arguments. We made a clear asset division agreement, and he moved into a small apartment near the office. I returned to the lakeside house, now fully mine. In the mornings, I still make tea, still read books, and occasionally write down personal reflections. Life after that wasn't loud, but I could breathe easier. I didn't need to win everything back, just to hold on to the one thing that mattered most: autonomy.